All right, everybody. Welcome to another um, session where you have a kind of a town hall meeting with me, mayoral candidate Andre Davis. Um, Thank you, everybody, for coming out. Apologize for the technical difficulties, but let's get right into it. In regards to pulling up some of the questions that I've received um, from people in regards to my platform, the seven pillars that I refer to on the flyer that you may have seen, as well as a lot of other things. If you have any questions, please put them down in the comments. Um, I can see pretty much everything that you guys are sending me. So let's get right into it. Um, as you all know, I am running for DC mayor. My name is Andre Davis. I am a former classroom educator with almost a decade of classroom experience, fourth generation native Washingtonian, coming from Ward 6, Capitol Hill. I grew up in Washington, D.C. I was educated by the D.C. public school system. I taught in the D.C. public school system, and now I am currently running for mayor. So let's get into it. Many of you are, kind of joining me for the first time. Some of you guys have been here a couple times, but let's get right into what we're going to talk about tonight. So my focus tonight is basically in regards to the seven pillars of my platform that I've been referred to. You can always check out my platform at www.andre4dc.com. FORDC. Many of you are receiving this live stream from Instagram, from Facebook, from YouTube, and Twitter. So we're going to get right into it. So for those who do not know what my platform pillars are, the seven pillars of platform, the seven pillars are education, public health, transportation, economy, city government, public safety, and housing. So all of these are critical areas for development, critical areas that need planning and evaluation in the city. So I incorporated all of those seven pillars into my platform to have a solution or resolution for some of the ailments that the city is currently facing. So let's go and check some of these questions that I received. And thank you to everyone who submitted questions. If you did not submit a question, you still have some time. I'll answer the questions that are in the chat or that I see in the chat as I go after I finish the questions that have been rightfully submitted. All right. So, first question. First question. I'm going to just pick through. So, in the area of public health, there were a couple questions. It looks like the first question: what limitations should be placed on the government's ability to act in the name of public health? That's a very good question. So I believe that the government, depending on who you're referring to. So right now we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic and crisis. And so what we've seen is not only have we seen federal mandates come into play, we've also seen local mandates come into play. And these are two extraneous different governments. So you have DC not being a state. Means that we have a local government, but we also have the federal government also having a lot of say so in some of the things that we try to mandate or negotiate. So in this particular case, the role of the federal government, of course, we should follow what the CDC has said. I think that with the recent uh, correspondence from the CDC, we've seen them kind of limit or shrink um, practically reduce the time of quarantine for people in the good faith that people will return to work. At this point, a lot of people are vaccinated. A lot of people have received their boosters. So, in particular, the CDC has made those guidelines for people who are asymptomatic and people who are vaccinated. But I still think it's practically almost common sense to have the same measures in place. Please wear your mask. Please give people 6 feet of space. Please try not to crowd or overcrowd in certain areas. So for me, the limitations should be placed on the government's ability in regards to federal mandates versus the local mandates. Because DC is not a state, some of these federal mandates or guidelines that come from the CDC oftentimes conflict with the things that we're trying to do here. We've seen businesses crash or practically close their doors because the COVID-19 pandemic has been so wrenching on their business. So I think that we should have a balance in, using the federal guidelines, of course, and using those federal guidelines um, to kind of incorporate them into our city's mandates and guidelines. Second question. I'm trying to go through the ones that are particularly for each one. Public health. So right now we're on public health. Another question was, describe how you might design a community health campaign, and in your description, consider both risky behaviors and health promoting behaviors. Wow. Okay. So you guys came with some good questions today. Essentially, when you are designing a community health campaign, you want to actually have the community's buy-in. You want to actually have feedback, constructive feedback and criticism from the community, and that's often something that we have not seen in the particular areas. We have not seen consistent community feedback or the push for consistent community feedback. Had we seen this, we probably would have had more residents buy into vaccination. We would have had more residents with appropriate information in regards to vaccination and mandates that are being made. But when there is a disconnect in regards to communication with the constituents that the communication or mandates affect, then that is where you have that pushback. That is where you have that immediate pushback. So for me, I would design a community health campaign based on getting the information out there. We need to get that information out there. We need to get the data out there. The COVID-19 data is alarming when you look at it from one perspective. So what we need to do is to not kind of shock people. In my opinion, I think we've tried to shock people or force feed people this shocking information to make sure that they are essentially buying into the community health. And that's I don't believe that that's the way that we should be going. I think that we should be transparent. We should be accountable for the information that we put out there. We should be accountable for the plans that we put out there. If they fail or if they're going well, we should still have that accountability. And right now, we don't see that from the current administration. How will you support caregivers and the direct care workforce during pandemics like COVID-19? So how will I support caregivers and the direct care workforce during pandemics like COVID-19? So hopefully we don't have any more pandemics. But in this particular case, for right now, supporting caregivers is critical because I have a 94-year-old great aunt that I take care of, and I particularly make sure that she runs her errands, make sure that she goes to the grocery store, make sure that her bills are technically paid, or that she's having the things that she needs that are necessities. She lives on a fixed income. So when you see that, particularly I'm a caregiver. I have a brother who is paranoid schizophrenic. So with that being said, during this time, it's critical because how can a person work a job and care for people who need their utmost attention? And I think that is the risky way that we have kind of knocked into the pandemic. We have not given the support to the caregivers and direct care workforce during the pandemic. We took forever to bail out a lot of people who were self-employed or needed to, they did odd and miscellaneous jobs. We dragged our feet when it came to, in regards to Department of Employment Services, and we essentially now, even with the government, this current administration's response to caregivers, we've taken our educators and we have not given them COVID leave. Um, it goes back and forth as to if they have it, if it's retroactive. There's no communication once again, and there's no accountability for people who had to take off and not be compensated during that particular time. So I think that we haven't given that particular push or support to our caregivers and direct care workforce. And I think it's time that we start going into it. I saw a question in the chat, and someone said, what is your opinion on the local mandate of DC and the recent posting of vaccination required ID and vaccination card for restaurants and other public areas? Okay, so that's a great question. Thank you for the submission. Um, to be honest, I am kind of on the fence, and I say what I say, and I mean what I say. I do believe that people should be vaccinated if that is their choice. Oftentimes, we've turned the vaccination or non-vaccination into a very, very politicized tool, and I think it's a driving force in separating or division in this country. Um, in regards to public areas, we know now that a certain percentage of our city is vaccinated. It's above 65%. We know that our city is vaccinated, just like other places. We have high vaccination rates. The issue now comes from, where do you tread the line of being discriminatory or being not as inclusive to people who, for good reasons, they may not be vaccinated, whether it is medical, whether it is religious, whether it is personal choice. I often kind of feel very disheartened that I've seen residents on social media bash people, saying like, you're causing death to people because a person's not vaccinated. I've seen people physically assault people because they were not vaccinated. I've seen these things in the city, and it's unfortunate because at this point, I think we're so far into the pandemic that if a person is vaccinated, they have that protection and buffer. They've done what they consider to be their due civic duty, and if a person can or is not vaccinated, there is usually a reason as to why they are not vaccinated. So, in regards to the opinion on the local mandates and the posting of vaccination, I don't believe that that's the way that we should really be pushing. I think that there is a way to compromise for people who are vaccinated versus not vaccinated, and I don't know I honestly can't really say what the effects of this mandate will be. We've seen in the federal courts that the workplace mandate for businesses was knocked down. So what we see now is we've seen so many people go back to the workplace that got vaccinated, and now it's coming out through the Supreme Court that the federal government cannot mandate that. So I don't know what the direct, in my honest opinion, to be very transparent, I don't know what the direct result of mandating vaccination for all constituents of restaurants. I don't know if that's going to mean people are going to go elsewhere to outside of the city to go dine. I don't know if that's going to bring more people into the city because we're still, although we're 2 years into the pandemic, we still don't have enough data to show the long-term effects of what COVID-19 is doing. And that's on every level, whether it's public health, public safety, or mental health, or actually the economy. We just don't have that data yet. So I'm not quite sure how that would look or what that looks like. But I do know that we do tread a fine line with alienation or being discriminatory based on vaccination status. But at the end of the day, if if the businesses support it, then that's a large constituency base. Let's get into education. I see questions about education. And thank you guys for joining in. If you have any questions, please put them at the bottom in comments. Let's So education. What will you do to raise teachers' salaries and strengthen teacher preparation? That's a good question. As an educator myself, um, I know the work that goes into uh, teachers being rock stars. I know the work that goes into the long hours, the sleepless nights, the going home and thinking about your students, even when the students have gone home, and have kind of erased you from their mind. I know the mental effects that occurs when you are in the classroom. So I'm a full supporter of unions. I'm a full supporter of the Washington Teachers Union. I'm a full supporter of making sure that teachers are compensated for the jobs that they do. And oftentimes, when I was an educator, I found that the current administration and the previous administrations would drag their feet in regards to collective bargaining, in regards to pay raises, and it oftentimes costs us more money because what usually happens is if a contract is not negotiated in time, and then you go 2 years into a new collective bargaining agreement, then you have to retroactively pay teachers, which means now the money that we could have just kind of paid up front is now kind of retroactively owed to teachers, and we have to come out of pocket. So I'm a firm believer of getting contracts done, getting that collective bargaining, those new contracts done, and compensating teachers for their current, for what they're worth, which is a lot, everything. I'm also a big supporter of paying substitute teachers to make sure that they are in the classroom. The current mayor and the current administration gloated about paying substitutes $17 an hour, which is about $1 and maybe 75 cents, $1.70, almost $2 above. It's $2 above the minimum wage. Substitute teachers ask for $300 a day. At $17 an hour, they're getting paid $136 a day. So the $300 a day is essentially 7.5 hours, which is a teacher's contractual day from 8 o'clock to 3:30. It's 7.5 hours times $40. $40 is a significant number, and I believe this number is what the substitute union kind of picked up, is because that's the admin premium pay. So when I was a teacher, let's say the Spanish teacher was out for a week, and my kids had Spanish specials, and I have a you have a planning period as an educator. But what happens is if they don't have coverage, your principal or administrator will say, "Hey, can you take this class?" Now, a person who is not knowledgeable wouldn't know that the admin premium even exists. But as a previous building rep for the Washington Teachers Union, I learned basically, you're supposed to be compensated because you're supposed to be allotted X amount of hours or minutes a week for your planning periods. So that $40 an hour was the admin premium of me covering that class because it was outside of the scope of duties and my responsibilities. I don't see anything wrong with paying substitutes $40 an hour because if we were to pay these substitutes $40 an hour, the substitutes would come in more trained. They would have more income to basically be a substitute teacher, which could also prove to be a pathway to them becoming licensed educators. So not only does that create a avenue for people coming off the street to say, "Hey, I want to see if teaching is for me. Let me substitute for a week or two, and if I like it, let me go ahead and get my license, and let me go ahead and switch careers, and they may be a good teacher." And I think that the licensure process for teachers in general going through OSSI, the Office of State Superintendent, it's too arduous. It's such an arduous task to basically to send in your transcripts and then send in your practice scores, send in your degrees, to send in all of this stuff, and then it's still not processed within 12 weeks. And oftentimes that 12 weeks mark, you have the public school system or your school system telling you, "Hey, we need you to get your licensure." But it's like, "Hey, I already submitted it and I gotta wait 12 weeks." And then 12 weeks, that's 12 weeks is a long time. It's 3 months. So what happens is next thing you know, 4 months go by, 5 months go by, the entire 10 months of your contract goes by or of the school year goes by, and then you're no longer basically you still don't have your licensure. Another education question. Let's see. What will you do to ensure education is more tailored to the students' individual needs and empowers active learners that feel ownership of their academic journey? Um, So, in order to ensure that education is tailored to the students, find we have to find, train, and retain effective teachers. And unfortunately, with the current evaluation system that the public school system has, that DC Public Schools has, the impact system is not, in my opinion, a true to form evaluative system. I think it does not account for factors that are outside of the control of an educator. I do not believe that it is used in a evaluative practice. I often have seen with my own two eyes how punitive and how disciplinary impact can be to educators for things that oftentimes are out of their control and oftentimes come as a result of being overwhelmed with the amount of things that they already have on their plate. So, in order to ensure that their education is tailored to them, we have to first get rid of that punitive system. I think that we should replace it. I think that the name should be changed. There are some great points too that are in the impact evaluation system currently that I think that we should carry over. But I do think that the name impact has a negative connotation to it, and I also think that some of the essential practices that are in the impact are not necessarily the best way to evaluate a teacher's efficiency or effectiveness. Let's see. Do I have any more questions on education? Okay, this is a good one. It says, how will you empower educators to develop flexible environments that recognize that learning happens in different places at different times and not just in the school building? We have to create spaces. We have to create positive spaces. In order to empower educators, we have to give them the resources that we need. Currently, the educators are battling not only battling the COVID-19 pandemic, they're battling learning retention loss. They're battling their own personal, home lives. They're battling, the government in this particular time because what's happening is the HVAC systems in most of these schools have not been updated, so people are not, in the safest air qualities. KN95 masks have not yet really been provided to students. The mayor just passed, I guess she just initiated an initiative today that, where when you go to pick up your rapid test, you can also get 2 masks. But honestly, that's not enough. That's not going to be enough. And I think that that is not going to curb the transmission or spread of COVID-19. I know my mother caught COVID-19 being in the classroom. DCPS still does not have COVID coordinators as the mayor and the chancellor promised. They still do not have space heaters for outside lunch, so you still have a conglomerate of students eating in the same place. And some students have said, hey, I'm going to skip lunch because I don't feel comfortable taking my mask off. We've seen students walk out and address those particular concerns, especially at my alma mater, Banneker. They did a walkout the other day where they talked about these same things. Some students say, I go the entire day without eating lunch because I'm scared to take off my mask and eat because there's no space. We can't eat outside because it's cold. It's 20 degrees and there's no space heaters. And you can't have multiple lunch periods because that cuts into the education time or the day. So I think that right now, we must give our educators the resources that they need to not only battle the COVID-19 pandemic, but to battle learner loss, as well as to make sure that everybody is safe. I do believe, I'm a strong believer that we should be provided with virtual options, so that if parents and homes and families are not comfortable with sending their child to school based on whatever the reason may be, there should be a virtual option available. Um, let's move on. Housing. So with housing, let's see what questions I have in housing. Wow, okay, this is a good question. What's more important for our city right now? Building homes and commercial spaces, or rehabbing, expanding, and utilizing our existing homes and storefronts? I am a firm believer of aesthetic, and anyone that is from Washington D.C. pre hyper development, so I would say most likely before Mayor Anthony Williams, um, there was some development, but aesthetic. Each neighborhood has their own aesthetic, right? You go into Capitol Hill and you see row homes, you see Victorian style homes. You go to 16th Street Heights, you see certain types of homes. You go to Deanwood, you see certain types of homes, whether they're single family homes, detached homes, different types of architecture and designs across the city. I'm a firm believer of taking what we already have and making it better. Now, of course, we won't be able to do that in every capacity. We won't be able to do that in every capacity because some stuff does have to come down. It doesn't fit the aesthetic currently that we have in this new era. But I believe that what's important is rehabbing and better utilizing our existing homes and storefronts, especially when it comes to the aggressive housing initiative that the current administration has. Knocking homes down or knocking schools down and replacing them with condos is not going to be something that we can maintain or sustain. Because what happens when we run out of the places to put these schools? Like, what happens when neighborhoods get older and there's no more students in that neighborhood? We've seen it all too often. We've seen neighborhoods grow up and age, and then what happens is there's no more elementary kids. We have entire communities where uh, the senior citizen rate is high because everyone aged in that community, and a lot of the people moved because they went on to do career aspirations, education aspirations, and things of that nature. So what we see oftentimes, um, we see people get aged out, and then the school doesn't have anybody to go there. So what happens is under enrolled, and then they eventually close it. And then what happens with the school? It either becomes a charter school where they're making kids travel to that particular school, or they knock it down, or they sell it to a developer once it sits. But I'm a firm believer that we should rehab and expand what we already have because there's a lot of hidden jewels in the city. There's a lot of development that we can build on top of and expand. Um, let's see, housing questions. Looking through. Okay, this is a good one. Um, can our children afford to remain in or return to the community as they start their own households? No. Straightforward answer, no. Depending on what community you come from, I know for a fact, like with me, when you go off to college and you come back, you do your 4 years in your university and you come back. Some people move to other cities or move to that particular area where their university is, but there's a lot of us that come back and we find our own jobs. And what I've seen in my demographic, being 31 years of age, I've seen a lot of my peers move to Maryland, move to Virginia, move right outside that line because it's more affordable. They can't afford a home in the neighborhood that they grew up in because their neighborhood is now being overpriced because people are adding third levels to their homes and developers are putting these big condo buildings. And I'll use specific neighborhoods that have kind of changed, not to highlight these neighborhoods to say that they're bad neighborhoods right now, but just to highlight the development and how it affects people. Let's look at the Trinidad neighborhood in Northeast. Trinidad, as you know, at one point in time, a lot of people say it was not, it was a very tight knit community, and then there was an issue in regards to, there's issues in regards to, um, you know, people who cannot afford to stay there, people who don't have jobs, and then you have a rush of people who have come in and kind of redeveloped a lot of the homes. And what happens is, if you have a home that's next to you and that home sells for a certain amount of price, it does affect the entire community. It does affect the housing market in that community. And what about our senior citizens who may be on fixed incomes? So if a house is $500,000, $600,000, how can a college fresh out of college individual who may just be getting that entry level job or may still be interning because they're going to get, a master's degree or they're going to get their PhD. How can they afford a house in their community that they grew up in if they return to their community and the houses are $650,000, $700,000? That is a lot for someone who may only make $57,000 a year, $60,000 a year starting off, if they're making that much. So what ends up happening is this forces a lot of those younger people to kind of partner up, buddy up, go rent an apartment, and it kind of deters or detracts them from path to ownership, to home ownership. It takes a little bit more time because you not only are you trying to keep up and increase your income, but you're also trying to keep up with the rising housing market. So that right there is a lot to keep up with, and I think that I don't personally think that the younger people are able to come back into the city and just buy a house or come back into the city and afford to purchase a home in their communities, because the communities are no longer the same communities that they left 4 or 5 years ago. Um, let's look at transportation. So once again, guys, if you have any questions, please put them at the bottom. I'm all for it. All for questions. Um, let's see. Transportation. This is a transportation question. How do you feel about the transportation options currently available in our city? Can all of our residents affordably get where they need to go? If not, what will you do to improve transportation in our city? So, right now, I'm not a big fan of the public transportation system in the Washington D.C. area. Metro has reduced their service. They'll be restarting their service to full, weekday service on February 7th, I believe. But in the meantime, the service has been on a weekend schedule. And if you know anything about the bus routes in DC, weekend schedule means that a lot of these bus routes are not serviced, or a lot of these bus routes are serviced uh, less frequently. So what happens is, people can't affordably get to where they're going. If I have to work a retail job, if I'm working a retail job and I'm getting paid minimum wage, and public transportation is my only way to get to work, not only do I have to wake up a lot earlier to get to where I need to go, so a 30-minute bus ride may now take me an hour and 30 minutes because I have to wait for the bus because it is on a weekend schedule. One of the ways that I think that I could, as mayor, I would be able to help people is, I'm a big proponent of a transit subsidy for our residents. I believe that our residents should not be on the hook for their transit options, on transit costs, especially when the transit system is not the most efficient, or you're having service issues, or you're having tracks that need to be rebuilt because you're not being accountable in regards to when trains are serviced, how they're serviced, when buses are serviced. We've seen multiple trains from the newer series derail. We've seen multiple fires happen in the tunnels and under the stations. We've seen buses break down. We've seen buses, get stuck. We've seen bus driver shortages. So for me, I'm a big proponent of a transit subsidy, and I know that there are other people out there that are currently in office that are proponents for transit subsidies. Um, so I think that's one way that I would be able to help residents affordably get to where they need to be by providing a transit subsidy. And I think that that right there would be a big help, as well as trying to increase the circulator routes. So trying to increase the DC circulator routes to service areas where the metro service is um, um, not quite fulfilled would also be another step in the right direction. I think that those particular things, those two things, would be immediate. It would prove to be immediate impacts to our community and our residents. So, transportation, another question. It says, what should change in the district's transportation program? Okay, I'm sorry. What should change in the district's transportation program to support walkable communities, which are better for the economy and the environment? So, I'm a big proponent of protected bike lanes. I'm a big proponent of increasing the bike lanes, especially on routes that are impacted by heavy and congested traffic, such as 16th Street, such as 9th Street, such as 7th Street. These particular places all suffer from that congestion based on not only cars but public transportation. So by providing protected bike lanes and expanding on what we already have in place, I think that those are the things that would create more walkable communities. Also, in order to decrease transportation, you have to make you have let me slow down. In order to decrease transportation, you have to increase proximity. So I'm gonna repeat that. In order to decrease transportation, you have to increase proximity. What does that mean? That means that if I live in this neighborhood, I should be able to walk to my neighborhood school. I should be able to walk to my neighborhood grocery store. I should be able to walk to my neighborhood clinic or neighborhood medical facility. I should be able to walk to the area that has the leisure activities, such as restaurants, bars, any place that has leisure activities. I should be able to walk to my neighborhood library. So once again, in order to decrease the need for transportation, we have to increase proximity. And I think that will create a true walkable city. Moving on, let's see. Economy. This is a good one. If elected, what 3 steps would you take to put our city on a firmer financial footing? Okay, so to answer that question, I already believe that our city is on a firm financial footing. We do have a surplus of an upwards of $500 million. So in order to really, I don't know what's more firmer than that. I mean, having $1 billion is more firm, of course, but to have almost $600 million in a surplus, what happens is now you have to kind of allocate where those funds are going. And in order to make sure that we are on a firm financial standing, we have to make sure that that $600 million that we have in surplus, that we allocate it and reallocate it to places of interest, places of priority and need. So taking that 600 million and throwing it into public health and making sure that when George Washington University or the George Washington Hospital Center, as well as United Medical Center, when they create the St. Elizabeth's Hospital and that's set to open in 2023, when they do that, how are we going to get people to buy into that hospital? Is it going to be in walking distance? How are we going to use those funds from our surplus to kind of spearhead that? How are we going to take that 600 million and push it into our arts programs? How are we going to take the 600 million and give it to our businesses that are well deserved? One of the ways that I think that we could keep our city on a firm financial footing would be to take some of that surplus, even if it was $1 million, taking $1 million and breaking it down into smaller grants throughout the cities where we need economic development, where we need to spearhead or push for economic development. So you're looking at Ward 7 and giving grants there. You're looking at wards 8, giving grants there. You're looking at wards 5, giving grants there. You're looking at wards 1 and giving grants there. Not just grants to black residents, not just grants to Hispanic residents. We're talking about opening it up to all residents. Where if you have an idea for a business, allow the city to use some of this surplus to allocate it to a grant budget where we could potentially take some of those areas that we need to rehab that we talked about previously when I was talking about rehabbing and expanding. We can take some of that and say, look, there's a storefront here. It just needs to be rehabbed. We'll put the money into it, but you have to come up with a business and it has to be sustainable. And you have to apply for this grant, and then we can give you that. And then that's one more business to help spur economic development in that particular area. So I think we are already on a good financial footing because DC has a significant amount of surplus funds. I believe it's 572 million. So upwards of $600 million in surplus. And now it's just on the administration to pay attention to its constituents and say, where's this money going to be the best invested? Where can we best invest this particular surplus? And it doesn't have to be all of the surplus. The surplus could be broken down into quarters or pieces and saying, hey, here's 100 million that we're going to allocate to A, B, C, and D programs. So I think that that's the only way that we can kind of keep our city on a firm financial footing is by not allowing certain areas to remain undeveloped and not allowing certain businesses to fall by the wayside. All right, let's see. City government. City government. How would you ensure that all District of Columbians, including all of those employed by the federal government, have access to paid family leave? So, I think that paid family leave is a given. It's a necessity. It's a human right. Everyone has something that occurs. Everyone has family. Let's start there. Everyone has family, whether they are your blood relatives or they are people that you've grown up with and have seen from you were a small baby and they watched you grow up. You consider them to be family, and I think oftentimes we blur the line, and it's for good reason. But for paid family leave, I believe that that is a right for every worker, everyone employed. Um, so even if you're employed by the federal government, if you are a DC resident, I would make sure that everyone is having paid family leave. Some people don't receive it. Some people don't receive it. And once again, we go back to the education. They had COVID. There was no COVID paid leave. You have a lot of our educators that work in the district, but they live in Prince George's County. In Prince George's County, the first 2 weeks of the new year, they pushed virtual. So that means kids were home. So when you were home, when your kids are home, you have to be home because it's illegal to leave them by themselves. So there's no one that's going to be able to watch your children or take care of your family while you're at work in the district, but there's no COVID leave or there's no paid family leave in regards to situations like that. So I think that that's something that we should revisit and make sure that we are basically giving out to the people who need to have that family leave, because I believe that's a human right. And everyone at some point in their life is going to have a family crisis, a family situation, or a family scenario that is going to prevent them from coming to work and being their most effective or efficient self. So okay, I'm gonna just go through the random questions that may have been other questions that don't pertain to my 7 pillars. Let me find one. Let's see. What will be your greatest strength as a mayor? That's a good question. I believe my greatest strength would be being a people person. Um, Anyone who knows me, whether they've known me as a young child, as a professional, as a working adult, as a brother, as a son, as an organization member, however you know me, everybody knows that I'm a people person. Like, I'll talk to anybody. I'll make anybody feel welcome. So I believe that that's going to be my greatest strength. Being able to connect with people, just being able to see where they're coming from and saying, you know what, I may not come from that particular situation or scenario, but I can definitely understand why your perspective is that way and give life to their perspective. I think oftentimes in politics we find ourselves trying to discredit the opposition's point. And it's like the opposition's point sometimes may be the same point that we're trying to make, just presented in a different perspective. When you're talking about taxes, there are some people on one side that are going to say raise taxes. There's some people on the other side who are going to say no, cut taxes. And their perspective on taxes may be different, but essentially they're saying the same thing. They're looking out for them, for the best interest of their constituents or the people that are around them in their communities. And oftentimes, being able to understand why a person is coming or saying that particular stuff or has that perspective allows you to have a greater strength in compromise and have a greater strength in being a team player or meeting the needs of multiple constituencies. So I think that would be my greatest strength as a mayor, being a people person and being able to relate to multiple perspectives without passing judgment, without being biased, without being selfish, without dismissing anyone's thought process, um, time, dedication, or passion behind an issue or stance. So I think that would be my greatest strength. Um, what motivated you to get involved with city government? I think for me, I got into city government or to get involved with city government because I wanted to be the change that I wanted to see. Like, I grew up as a young child. We were not well off. My grandmother and great aunt were caretakers all the way up until my grandmother passed, and all the way up until my great aunt was probably in her 80s. My great aunt is 94 now. And she was a caretaker. And to see them get up and do what they did every day and not complain and pay their bills and make ends meet and to really not really have the support or the push that everyone else had in regards to coming into DC. It made me want to get into city government to keep the equality, in check, to keep the balances in check. Because a lot of people oftentimes they come into DC, they milk the resources and they leave. And they claim DC or they say, hey, yeah, I'm from DC or I'm a DC resident or I live in DC, but they're not invested in their communities. They don't go to the local schools and volunteer. They don't know anybody on their block. They don't know their neighbors. They don't know how, ANCs work. They don't know how government works. So for me, what motivated me was I really wanted to be the change that I needed, that my grandmother needed, that my great aunt needed, that my mother needs, that my brother who's paranoid schizophrenic needs, that my younger sister needs, that my niece and nephew needs, and my uncles need. Like, I wanted to be that change that everybody needs, whether you're a guy on the corner standing outside of a store or you're a, you know, full-time, attorney going to court every day and litigating cases. No matter where you are on the spectrum of life, my motivation came from to get involved came from being that beacon of hope, being that light for those people. What's my favorite thing about living in DC? My favorite thing about living in DC is restaurants. I love the restaurants. I love the neighborhood, pubs and bars. I love the events. Like I love H Street Day, H Street Festival. I used to love Georgia Avenue Day and the Caribbean Festival. Um, I used to love going to, was Battle of the Barbecue, barbecue battle, Safeway barbecue, like the events and the how eclectic DC is. You can get into politics if that's what you want to do in DC, but you can also get into art. We have tons of Smithsonian museums. We have tons of localized museums. We have tons of art galleries. Um, Politics, art, food. Um, we have a booming sports scene now. We have two champions, with the Nationals and the Mystics. Like we have great teams. So my favorite part about living in DC is the ability to do whatever you want to do. However you want to do it, wherever you want to do it, you can do it in DC. So that's my favorite part. And I think this will be the last question because we're coming up on an hour. Um, if you received $1 million grant to use for the city any way you want it, what would you do with it and why? That's a tough question. I don't necessarily know what I would do with it, but let's see. I would love to put that $1 million into communities that need it. And not even that just need it, just put it into the communities in general. So I would break it up into zip codes as much as we could, and divvy it up. So by divvying it up, we would basically, um, if I divvy it up, I could basically put it in certain areas where we need it. So I would do it by zip code though. By zip code because there's 53 zip codes in DC, and because you have 53 zip codes in DC, you can break that down. So each person would essentially get, don't get my math wrong. Um, each person would get X amount of thousands, and what you would get is the ability to push those grants into the area. That $1 million would be a lot, in regards to the 52 zip codes. You know what I'm saying? Like basically, what you're looking at is each zip code could get $20,000, and $20,000 may not seem like a lot, but in some areas, that $20,000 is going to fund a program for after school development to battle retention laws. In some areas, that zip code might need they may not have a grocery store, so that $20,000 could go to rehabbing, a local corner store where we could turn it into a grocery or produce store for them. So they wouldn't have to travel so far to get to a grocery store. That $20,000 would benefit them in ways that would be specific to that zip code, or um, specific to that zip code. Now, in order for this zip code project to work with that $1 million, we would have to get together with the ANCs because, of course, certain zip codes fall in more than one ANC or S&D. So what would happen is we would have to get that group of people together. But I think that with the ANCs that we have some of the best people at the ground level. So I think that it would be possible to take that 20,000 and do a lot with it per zip code. So if I had $1 million and I could do anything with it, I'd take that 20,000 per zip code, and give it to the ANCs to come up with a collective need for that particular zip code. And if a zip code was willing to forfeit or reallocate some of that budget to another zip code, by all means, that would be the beauty of it. And I think that, I think that we would see that happen. We would see that some zip codes would say, we don't need $20,000. We need like 7. So the other 13 can go to this zip code, or we can split it up between some other zip codes that may be in need. And I think that that's what I would do with the $1,000,000 if I had it. So are there any other questions before we end our live today? No? Well, I want to thank everyone who came out. I want to thank everyone who came out, sent a question in, emailed me a question. I want to thank everyone who's been pushing my campaign, whether it be social media, whether it be you telling your friends to vote for me, whether it's been a donation of any kind. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you guys, pushing my campaign, because it takes a lot of funds, it takes a lot of willpower and dedication to run for mayor or to run for any elected office. So I want to say thank you to you all for coming out. If you can look down, depending on what you are seeing, you know, you guys can um, donate to my campaign. Every dollar counts. If you are a DC resident, then your contribution is matched by 5. So, for example, if you were to give me $50, DC would match me $250 along with your $50 contribution. So, with that being said, donate today. Join the movement. I'm looking for volunteers to go around in the district to have people sign my petitions. I'm looking for people to circulate my petitions online. I'm looking for people to knock on doors for me. I'm looking for people to call people during phone banks. I'm looking for people to continue to promote and send in videos saying how they support me and why other people should support me. Because without you guys, this won't work. So let's act right. Accountability, communication, and trust. Thank you for coming out to my live today. And hopefully this is the first of, well, not the first, but the third of many. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.